Imagine for a moment, the man called to liberate the Hebrews decides to accept the throne of Egypt. What would have happened to God's people? And more importantly, how would Moses, with his faith and wisdom, have governed the greatest empire of the time? Today, we're diving into one of the greatest what-ifs in biblical history. Get ready for a journey that will stretch your imagination and perhaps inspire you to reflect on the choices that shape your own life. Because, in the end, it all comes down to this: decisions. Fasten your seatbelt, because what's coming next is a deep dive into an alternate universe where Moses accepts the offer to become Pharaoh of Egypt, changing the destiny of an entire nation forever. Let's go. Moses, the Hebrew prince who grew up as an Egyptian, is one of the most fascinating figures in the Bible. His life is a mix of miracles, dilemmas, and pivotal choices. Let's revisit how it all began. Moses was born during a dark time for the Hebrews. Pharaoh had decreed that all newborn Hebrew boys were to be thrown into the Nile River. But with the courage of his mother, Jochebed, he was placed in a basket and sent adrift. Fate, or rather divine providence, led Pharaoh's own daughter to find the baby and raise him as an Egyptian prince. As a prince, Moses had access to the riches and finest education Egypt had to offer. He had status, power, and a privileged life, yet something inside him didn't quite fit. Moses knew he belonged to an enslaved people. The connection to his Hebrew roots was unavoidable, and his compassion for the oppressed led him to commit an impulsive act. Seeing an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, Moses intervened and killed the man. This crime forced Moses to flee to the desert of Midian, where he began a completely different life. From prince to shepherd, he spent 40 years living in anonymity, tending sheep far from the grandeur of Egypt. But the silence of the desert was broken by an encounter that would change everything. On Mount Horeb, a burning bush caught his attention. It was God speaking directly to him, giving him a clear mission: return to Egypt and free the Hebrew people from slavery. Moses hesitated. He didn't feel qualified. He wasn't a good speaker and feared facing Pharaoh. However, with God's promise to be with him, he accepted the call. Back in Egypt, Moses confronted Pharaoh with the now famous words, "Let my people go." But Pharaoh, with a hardened heart, refused. What followed were the 10 plagues that devastated Egypt, culminating in the death of the firstborns, a blow that finally broke Pharaoh's resistance. Moses led the Hebrews out of Egypt, beginning an epic journey through the desert toward the Promised Land. Now imagine a turning point. When Moses was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, he felt at home in the palace. Moreover, as he grew, he realized he could use his position to influence and perhaps even change the fate of the Hebrews from within the system. In this moment of reflection, Moses accepts the offer to become the next Pharaoh. He assumes leadership of Egypt, but with a completely different vision, driven by his faith and compassion for the Hebrew people. But would the Egyptian system, with all its oppression and idolatry, allow such change? Or would Moses be forced to compromise his values? This is the scenario we'll explore next. A decision that could alter not just Egypt's destiny, but the course of human history. Picture Moses in the splendor of the Egyptian palace, with the weight of Egypt's crown upon his head. He is not just a prince or an advisor. He is Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler on earth at the time. But unlike his predecessors, Moses is driven by principles that challenge everything the Egyptian system represents. Upon taking the throne, Moses faces resistance from Egypt's elite. The temple priests question his devotion to the gods, and the nobles don't understand his unusual concern for the Hebrew slaves. Nevertheless, he uses his strategic position to implement bold changes. Moses' first decision is to suspend the construction of the Grand Pyramids, which had consumed the lives of countless slaves. To him, a leader's glory doesn't lie in erected monuments, but in promoting justice. This action sparks outrage among the priests and the powerful, but ignites a glimmer of hope among the Hebrews. For the first time, they see a ruler who cares about their suffering. Moses realizes that freeing the Hebrews all at once could spark a rebellion among the Egyptians, whose economy depended on slave labor. Instead, he initiates a transition policy, reducing work hours, improving living conditions, and offering the Hebrews opportunities to learn trades outside construction. He dreams of transforming the slaves into free citizens, contributing to Egypt's development as an inclusive nation. But resistance is fierce. Many within the court conspire against Moses, viewing his actions as a threat to the established system. Some even begin to doubt his ability to govern. While battling Egypt's political and cultural forces, Moses maintains his faith in God. He creates a secret space within the palace to pray and seek guidance. It is in this place of divine communion that he finds the strength to face his challenges. However, God warns Moses that his position as Pharaoh is not enough to bring total liberation. The hardened hearts of the Egyptians and the structural sin of the system make complete transformation impossible without divine intervention. Over time, Moses succeeds in organizing a fair labor system, but this isn't enough to fulfill God's promise of liberation. The Hebrews begin to divide. Some recognize Moses as a just leader and believe Egypt can be transformed. Others, however, cry out for total freedom and accuse Moses of being just another Pharaoh who doesn't fully understand their suffering. In this scenario, an identity crisis emerges. Moses wonders, how can he remain faithful to God while governing a nation dependent on practices contrary to divine will? Even as Pharaoh, Moses can't prevent the signs of God from manifesting. A series of catastrophic events begin to strike Egypt. Crops fail, plagues spread, and the Nile, Egypt's lifeline, mysteriously begins to dry up. The Egyptians start questioning Moses' leadership. Are these disasters punishment from the gods he rejected? Or is it the God of the Hebrews showing his power? Moses realizes that despite his efforts, God's divine plan for liberation surpasses any human strategy. A moment comes when Moses is forced to make a definitive decision. He realizes he can no longer balance his position as Pharaoh with his divine calling to free the Hebrews. In a gesture that surprises both Egyptians and Hebrews, Moses abdicates the throne. He leads the Hebrews out of Egypt, but this time under even more dramatic circumstances. As Pharaoh, he managed to avoid the plagues that devastated Egypt in the original story. But now he faces another challenge. The journey through the desert is even harsher, as Egypt refuses to let them leave peacefully. This alternate story raises many questions. Moses temporarily changed Egypt's fate, but he could not avoid the divine purpose of liberating the Hebrew people. He tried to reconcile two worlds, but realized that following God required a complete break from the system he governed. Egypt, without the Hebrews, collapses economically, and Moses continues leading a nation learning to be free while traversing the desert. The story of Moses as Pharaoh invites us to reflect on choices that challenge our deepest values. Moses attempted to use his position to alleviate the suffering of the Hebrews, introducing changes within an oppressive system. But he ultimately realized that some structures are so deeply rooted that only divine intervention can truly transform them. How many times, like Moses in this narrative, do we try to balance two worlds? We want to honor our principles while also striving for success in a system that often goes against what we believe. Moses tried to reconcile the impossible, governing Egypt, a nation built on oppression, while remaining faithful to God's call to free the Hebrews. This makes us reflect. To what extent are we willing to sacrifice our values to achieve personal or professional goals? Is it worth trying to change a system from within? Or are there times when we must abandon it entirely to stay true to who we are? In the original story, Moses fled Egypt and after years in the desert, heard God's call. He hesitated, questioned his abilities, but ultimately obeyed. That act of obedience changed the course of history and became an example of faith and courage. In the alternate story, we see that even as Pharaoh, Moses could not fully accomplish his mission without completely trusting in God's plan. This teaches us that often our own plans, no matter how good they seem, are insufficient to achieve something truly extraordinary. We must depend on God and trust in His guidance. Another powerful point of reflection is the impact our choices have on the lives of those around us. Moses, both in the original story and the alternate one, carried the destiny of an entire nation on his shoulders. His decisions, whether good or bad, affected millions of people. And what about us? How are our choices impacting others? Sometimes a decision that seems small, like giving in to a temptation or staying silent in the face of injustice, can have far greater repercussions than we imagine. This story challenges us to examine our own journey. Are we settling into comfortable positions that don't reflect the purpose we're called to? Or are we willing to take steps of faith, even if it means giving up privileges or facing greater challenges? Think about your own life. Is there something you feel called to do, but you've hesitated because of fear or attachment to what you've already achieved? Just like Moses, God might be calling you to something greater, something that will impact lives and transform stories. Here are some practical steps we can take from this reflection. Evaluate your priorities. Are you investing your time and energy in things that truly have eternal value? Seek divine wisdom. Pray and ask for guidance to make decisions aligned with God's purpose for your life. Be an agent of transformation. Even in difficult systems, look for ways to promote justice and compassion without compromising your values. Trust in the bigger plan. Remember that even when we don't understand the details, God is working on something greater than we can imagine. An inspirational conclusion. In the end, the story of Moses as Pharaoh shows us that no matter how powerful or strategic our position, it will never be enough without God's direction. True transformation begins when we surrender to God's plan and allow Him to guide us. So, what did you think of this what if? Moses as Pharaoh brought reflections that go far beyond an alternate story, didn't it? This possibility makes us think about the choices we make and how they can impact not just our lives, but the lives of those around us. Now, it's your turn to participate. Share in the comments what you would do if you were in Moses' place. Would you try to change the system from within? Or would you follow God's call to something greater, despite the challenges? Oh, and don't stop here. We have many more alternate stories to explore. Which other biblical figure would you like to see in a what if? Maybe a universe where David doesn't face Goliath, or where Judas repents before betraying Jesus. We want to hear your opinion. And of course, if you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel. This helps us continue creating stories that inspire, challenge, and make us reflect. So, stay tuned. The next episode might bring a new perspective on one of the Bible's greatest events. See you then.